Sunlight filtered through the rose-colored glass of the little brick church, bathing the narrow aisle in warm hues of crimson and gold as Isaiah slipped into the back pew. At 7 years old, he already knew every line of the gospel hymns by heart, but he sang them again and again, because each note felt like a promise unfurling inside his chest. His grandmother sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, and whenever he hit a soaring high or a soft, trembling low, she would clutch his hand and whisper, "Sing, baby. Let them hear your heart." The choir loft above him was a hive of polished voices in crisp robes, but Isaiah didn't feel small. He felt part of something larger, a living tapestry of sound he had helped to weave. The pastor, a kindly man with a crinkled smile, often called down, "Isaiah, you've got the gift, son. Keep using it." After service, the choir director would sift through the rows of young sopranos and tenors, but she always paused to praise the little boy whose voice seemed bolder than his years. "You're welcome up here anytime," she told him, patting his head. Outside, the world beyond the church doors pulsed with life and urgency, cars honking, neighbors calling across fences. But inside, the congregation's rising voices gave him a sense of calm gravity. Isaiah imagined himself on grand stages, the hum of electricity like static in his veins, every eye fixed on the young black boy who made stained glass tremble. But he also noticed the posters in the foyer, photographs of the city youth choir, their bright uniforms and tidy formations drawing gasps of admiration from visitors. They were all white. He traced their faces with his eyes, so many mouths opening together in perfect harmony, and something tightened in his throat. He loved church choir more than anything, yet he wondered why voices like his never sang on those bigger stages. That question sparked inside him, a flicker that would soon blaze into a fierce determination. The morning of the city choir audition dawned crisp and cool, and Isaiah rose before the sun, nerves humming under his skin like a restless bird. He stood in front of the mirror in his bedroom, straightening his crisp white shirt and navy tie until every crease lay perfect. In the hallway, his grandmother hovered, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead and offering a hand-carved wooden cross she wore around her neck. "They'll hear you," she said softly. "Let your truth fill the room." He nodded, swallowing hard as he tucked the cross into his pocket, imagining its warmth against his palm as he sang. The auditorium smelled of varnished wood and stale carpet, rows of folding chairs arranged in neat lines beneath harsh fluorescent lights. Isaiah carried his sheet music, a weathered page marked with his practiced breathing cues, into a backstage corridor where teenagers milled about in gowns and blazers, their laughter echoing off the concrete walls. He spotted the city choir director, a tall woman with a silver bun and an expression of polite formality, consulting a clipboard with the names of applicants. Isaiah swallowed a burst of courage and stepped forward, offering his name, feeling the weight of every eye turned toward him. Inside the audition room, 3 panelists sat behind a long table, faces unreadable in the bright glare. Isaiah closed his eyes for a moment, picturing the stained glass light dancing across his church's choir loft, where every note felt cradled in grace. He lifted his chin and began to sing, his voice rising pure and strong with the first line of Ave Maria. Each phrase carried the years of Sunday mornings, the hush of the congregation, the swell of harmony that had taught him to trust his own sound. He felt the vibration in his chest, the air resonating like a chamber of possibility. When he finished, the room fell silent for a heartbeat that stretched too long. He opened his eyes to find the panelists scribbling notes, but offering no words of praise or critique. The director cleared her throat and said, "Thank you for your performance," her tone courteous but distant. Isaiah's stomach clenched as she slid a small card across the table, an invitation to the next group of auditions, he thought, until he read the single blank checkbox next to "Not Selected." No explanation, no feedback, just the finality of a stamp that seemed to echo against the walls. He gathered his belongings as the next singer was called in, the soft click of the door cutting him loose from the room. In the backstage corridor, teenagers congratulated one another, their voices bright with anticipation. Isaiah lingered for a moment, hesitating beneath the fluorescent haze, then slipped out into the empty hallway, where sunlight broke through a high window and dust motes danced in its beam. He closed his eyes and let the sound of his own breath steady him, the echo of his voice still humming in his bones. Walking home through quiet streets, Isaiah felt the sting of humiliation settle deep in his chest, but beneath it, a spark of defiance flickered. He pressed his hand over the wooden cross in his pocket and vowed that he would not let closed doors silence him. If the city choir would not hear his voice, he would find another stage, another audience, another way to let his song be heard, until no wall could keep him out, and every note he sang rang clear enough to break through any prejudice. In the hush of his bedroom, Isaiah set up a makeshift recording booth between his desk and the wardrobe, draping old blankets over lamps and chairs to muffle the outside world. He'd scavenged a secondhand USB microphone from an online marketplace and hooked it to his laptop, experimenting with free audio software until the input levels didn't crackle. Late at night, when the rest of the house lay silent, he pressed record and sang into the dim glow of his computer screen. First came his favorite gospel hymn, rendered not in its usual four-part harmony, but stripped bare. Just his voice, trembling at first but swelling with conviction as he built toward the chorus. After a handful of takes, he opened a new track and sang the same melody a second time, matching his pitch and tone as precisely as he could. Over the next hour, he layered 3 more harmonies, alto, tenor, and a soft falsetto, until the mix felt like a virtual choir rising in his cramped room. He tweaked each layer's volume, nudged the reverb just enough to give it cathedral echoes, and tested the balance until every strand of sound seemed woven into a single tapestry. Finally, he exported the file as an MP3 and created an account under the handle Solo Soul, choosing anonymity so that no prejudice could attach itself to his face. He uploaded the track to a small music sharing site and sat back, heart pounding. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a notification. 1 play, then 2. Over the next few days, he checked obsessively. 30 plays, 50, then 100. Comments trickled in. "Your harmonies gave me chills," read one. "Where can I hear more?" asked another. He felt a thrilling buzz each time someone clicked the like button, each time a stranger told him his voice had brightened their morning. Encouraged, Isaiah tried an R&B cover, singing with gentle improvisations and pausing only to adjust his blanket-lined booth. He posted it, watched it climb from 10 plays to 500, then to 1,000. At school, students passed him in the hallway, whispering, "Solo Soul," as though it were an inside joke that he alone didn't fully understand. He began to collect messages from budding musicians, asking for tips on recording at home, and he answered each with care. How to position the mic, how to soften ambient noise, how to breathe deeply to steady a trembling note. Though he still sang in secret, hiding behind his alias, Isaiah felt empowered by the community that had formed around his late-night experiments. In the shadows of his bedroom, he'd found a stage small but genuine, a place where his voice could grow unfiltered and free, ready for the day he'd step into the light. Isaiah stood beneath the soft glow of Edison bulbs at the local cafe's tiny open mic night, his palms damp, but his heart steady. He adjusted the single microphone, feeling the grain of the wooden stage under his feet, and glanced at the packed tables leaning forward in anticipation. When the house band finished their last set, the host handed him the mic and winked, a silent encouragement that settled his nerves. He closed his eyes and remembered every Sunday morning in his grandmother's church, every moment he'd practiced, lift every voice and sing, until the harmonies felt like part of his own breath. He opened his mouth and let the first line flow, his voice pure and unadorned in the hush that fell over the room. The cafe's chatter melted away, replaced by the resonance of his tenor weaving through the melody. With each phrase, he poured in the years of longing and pride he'd carried since childhood, the sting of rejection from the city choir threading through his vibrato. Listeners leaned back, eyes glistening, as he lifted the chorus to a gentle crescendo that made stray notes shimmer like fireflies. When his final note faded, a single moment of silence held the space, Then the room erupted in applause so fierce, it rattled the mismatched coffee cups on wooden tables. Unbeknownst to Isaiah, a young patron at the back had captured the entire performance on her phone and uploaded it to her live stream within seconds. Notifications began pinging on her screen as comments poured in. Who is this guy? I've never heard anything like it. Tell me he's from around here. The clip spread like wildfire, first through local community pages, then into regional news feeds. By the next morning, hashtags celebrating Isaiah's name trended across social media, and his handle Solo Soul, the alias he'd used for his home recordings, suddenly glowed with new followers. Messages flooded in, invitations to radio interviews, emails from music bloggers begging for more tracks, DMs from strangers moved to tears by his voice. Even the city choir director's office was abuzz, staffers debating whether to re-invite him to audition, their old notes re-evaluated in light of public outcry. Isaiah watched the numbers climb on his phone, thousands of plays, then tens of thousands, each new view a testament that his voice belonged not only in the back pew of a church, but on stages everywhere. As word of his cafe performance reached the mayor's desk, and city officials began to murmur about inclusion and talent, Isaiah felt the gravity of his sudden fame settle in. He realized that when one voice soared against the silence, it could shatter walls of exclusion and echo far beyond any closed door. And in that moment, with the world finally listening, he knew his song had become more than music. It had become a movement. A crisp autumn breeze rippled through this plaza in front of City Hall as Isaiah stood alone on the broad marble steps, the grandeur of the neoclassical facade rising behind him like a silent witness. Flags snapped on their poles, and a hush settled over the assembled crowd of council members, press photographers, city employees, and curious citizens who had turned out in greater numbers than anyone had expected. City officials who only weeks before had dismissed him without a second thought now flanked him in a semicircle, faces tight with anticipation, as if they all knew this moment would define them. The mayor, glancing at his notes, stepped forward and offered a brief welcome, a promise that today would be different, that every voice counted. Isaiah nodded once, his throat tight with a mix of nerves and resolve. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat and let the world fall away. The honking cars beyond the plaza, the soft murmur of anxious whispers, the chill air brushing his cheeks. Then he drew in a steadying breath, lifted his chin, and allowed the first note to emerge. A pure, clear tenor that hung in the air, unadorned, unaccompanied. As he wove into "His eye is on the sparrow," each syllable carried the weight of all the times he'd been told his talent was not for this stage, of every barred audition room and closed door. His voice swelled, rising in gentle crescendos that threaded through the columns of the building, drawing gasps from the crowd. Even the council members shifted in their seats, eyes widening as the harmonies, rich, soulful, unwavering, revealed a power they had long overlooked. Mid-song, a sudden hush fell. Passers-by stopped in their tracks. News cameras paused on record, and the wind stilled as though listening. Isaiah felt the pulse of his own heart synchronize with the silent beat of an entire community finally paying attention. He let his voice soar on the chorus, each note a declaration that bias could not silence truth. When the final phrase trembled into silence, there was a heartbeat of stillness. Then thunderous applause crashed across the plaza, hands pounded on benches, and the stone steps, whistles, and cheers rose up, and he saw tears glistening in the eyes of neighbors who had once walked past him without a glance. Breathless and buoyed by the ovation, Isaiah stepped down to face the crowd. The mayor approached with a solemn gravity, extending a hand that carried an engraved plaque of apology, an admission that the city had failed him, and a vow to ensure no other gifted child would be turned away. Isaiah took the plaque with shaking fingers, voice wavering only slightly as he offered a few humble words of thanks and hope. He spoke of doors now opening, of songs yet to be sung by every child who had ever felt small. And as his words echoed off the marble pillars, He knew this was more than personal vindication. This was a promise that the solo voice of one young man had the power to change the chorus of a city. Late one Wednesday morning, the boardroom at the Civic Arts Center felt simultaneously weighty and electric. Long, polished tables reflected the solemn faces of the City Choir Oversight Committee as they convened a special session on inclusivity in response to Isaiah's solo performance and the mayor's apology. The choir director, whose crisp uniform bore every insignia of institutional pride, opened the meeting by acknowledging the glaring gap in the choir's history. No student of color had ever made the final roster. She laid out decades of audition rosters, demographic data, and community feedback that painted a portrait of exclusion by design, however unintentional. At first, some trustees bristled, insisting that professional standards and musical excellence must remain paramount. But others, younger members newly appointed in recent years, pressed gently. Did excellence truly demand uniformity? Or did it flourish in genuine diversity? When the door at the back clicked open, Isaiah stepped in, flanked by his grandmother and the city council liaison. The room went still, as though every conversation paused to welcome him in. He approached the choir director's desk with quiet confidence, clutching the plaque he'd been awarded. Before the committee could invite him, he raised a hand and said, "Thank you for making space for me today. I came here once and was asked to leave. Today, I'll ask only that you listen." He spoke without notes, weaving together the memory of his first church solo, the sting of the audition snub, and the moment his voice rose on the city hall steps. He described how music had become both his home and his weapon against prejudice, urging the board to imagine every child in their city, black, white, brown, seeing themselves reflected in that choir's ranks. The room remained hushed after he finished, the example of his conviction hanging in the air like the final echo of his highest note. The choir director swallowed, then turned to the trustees with renewed determination. Over the next hour, they debated specific reforms, instituting blind auditions behind a screen so only the voice, not the face, could be judged, partnering with neighborhood schools and community centers to recruit talented singers from underrepresented areas, offering mentorship scholarships for advanced vocal training to Black and brown students, and convening an advisory council, including Isaiah himself, to oversee each season's selection process. A few longtime members voiced concern about logistical challenges and budget constraints. But one by one, their apprehensions softened in the light of Isaiah's testimony and the public's outcry. When the final motion was called, hands lifted in unanimous agreement. The committee chair turned to Isaiah with a warm, almost relieved smile. "We owe you more than an apology," she said, "and we intend to prove it through action." She invited him to join the new advisory council and to perform at the choir's next season opening concert, this time as an honored guest, not an overlooked stranger. As Isaiah walked out of the boardroom into the bright midday sun, he felt a profound shift beneath his feet. The walls of exclusion had cracked, and in their place, a doorway to harmony stood wide open for every young voice in the city. The night of the season opening concert arrived, and the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Isaiah stood backstage, listening to the rustle of programs and the murmur of families finding their seats, the same butterflies fluttering in his stomach that he'd felt before every performance since childhood. Only now, he wasn't alone. Alongside him stood the new generation of singers he had helped recruit and mentor, a tall sophomore from the West End, whose tremulous alto had blossomed into a rich warmth, a soft-spoken tenor from the East Side whose confidence soared after blind audition success, and a shy freshman whose radiant soprano held the promise of years to come. They exchanged nervous smiles, and Isaiah gently squeezed each shoulder, offering quiet words of encouragement. "You belong here," he reminded them, "just as much as anyone." As the lights dimmed, the choir filed onto the stage in orderly rows, faces lit by the glow of overhead spotlights. Isaiah stepped forward to introduce the evening, not as a soloist demanding attention, but as a bridge between past and future, a reminder that harmony is born from diversity. When the first notes of their joint anthem rose into the hush, every voice blended seamlessly, a tapestry of tones that carried across the hall and into the hearts of the audience. Waves of applause followed their final chord, echoing like thunder beneath the vaulted ceiling. Isaiah felt tears prick at his eyes as he scanned the crowd and saw grandparents, neighbors, and former doubters rising in unison, celebrating each young singer's triumph. After the concert, the lobby overflowed with congratulations and embraces. Parents and community leaders surrounded Isaiah and his proteges, pressing flowers into their hands and pressing them for details about rehearsals and the new audition process. A teenage girl approached him shyly, clutching a sheet of music, and asked if he would help her prepare for the next round. Isaiah knelt beside her, nodded with a broad smile, and offered to meet at the church loft that weekend. Around him, laughter and excitement swirled, the old barriers dissolved by the glow of shared achievement. Later, when the auditorium had emptied and only the warm scent of stage lights lingered, Isaiah lingered on the threshold. He could almost hear the echo of every note he had ever sung. The humble hymns in that back pew, the solitary harmonies in his bedroom, the bold solo beneath City Hall's marble columns, melding together into a single lasting chord. He pressed a hand to the doorframe and whispered a quiet gratitude to all who had opened their hearts and ears. A solo voice that refused to be silenced had reshaped an institution, ensuring that every aspiring singer, regardless of background, would find a place to sing. And in that stillness, he knew the song would continue, carried forward by every child brave enough to raise their voice and claim the stage.